Welcome everyone to interview number 26 of OC Improvement Month. Today with Jordan LR7. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey. How's it going?
Hey, pretty good. Hopefully
That's
you're
good.
feeling a little more awake since a couple minutes ago.
Uh no, I'm probably not gonna be awake for the entire thing,
Oh
but it's
no.
alright. It'll be fine.
Yeah, the time zone struggle always exists in this game.
Yeah. Just my sleep schedule as well is kinda
Oh no.
it's okay.
So, just in case anyone's not familiar with you, could you give a brief intro to who you are as a player and what people probably recognize you for?
Sure. I'm sure most people know me just by Jordan. A lot of people happen to get me mixed up with Jordan the Bear, but I am not him. I'm kind of known for, I suppose, my DT and a little bit of my speed, and for playing tournaments as well. I've played for Australian OWC and a couple of other community tournaments over the past 2 or 3 years. Um, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yes, I think I've just certainly recognized you probably from tournaments more than anything else,
Mm,
but that's more of my own bias as
yeah.
opposed to um, that being. But yeah, anyway, so I'm
Mm,
curious how you. I think we should probably start from the beginning because you actually joined relatively not that long ago. I feel like, January 2018, which
yeah.
with that and like adding on to that, you didn't even start playing until a couple months later. So
No.
yeah, could you walk us through a bit of your early history with the game?
So I suppose I saw Overwatch. I was into Overwatch a couple of years ago, and there was this kind of pro player who kind of used Osu as some sort of aim trainer. Like I suppose as like a bunch of people think of it as it's like this aim trainer that gets you better at FPS, but it really just doesn't do anything like that. So I installed Osu on my computer beginning of 2018, but my computer was a potato and it could not even run Osu. So I had to wait until, what was it, August? Until I got a laptop and started playing and really grinded the game. I think I had like 20,000 play count in the first 3 or 4 months of playing, which is pretty a decent amount, I'd say. But I look at some people's profiles these days, and they have like 8,000 play count per month, and it's like, what? How do you even do that? But I mean, people have told me that I've improved relatively quickly. I think I got 3 digit in 15 months, something like that. Which I'm not sure how how quick that is compared to today's standards. How good people are, and these new players that just somehow pop off every like 3 days. Like Window Life the other week just somehow comes out of nowhere and does what he does. Like
Right.
I don't know, people are crazy now. But uh, just playing, and I used to was a no mod only player. I think for the longest time, um, kind of no mod hard rock player that would play long maps, um, and despised anyone who played DT, which is kind of ironic, considering what I play now. But um, I suppose that sort of sums it up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, 15 months to go from, I guess, when you got your laptop in August 2018, I assume,
Mm,
all the
yeah.
way to, I guess, by the start of 2020, which, I mean, that wasn't that long ago. I think
No.
most people who were three digit then are probably still around that same range, or if not, then upper four digits. So that's still pretty
Mm,
fast, I would say. And yeah, I mean, your play count really speaks for itself. I
yeah.
think you averaged like 3K, 4K, sometimes hitting 5K play count in a
Yeah.
month during that time.
I have no idea how I did that. That is absurd.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're
I
playing
suppose
more or less after since then?
Oh, for sure, less. I mean, when you first start out, right, and you play and you see like your improvement from one session to the next, it's like I got this score this session like 2 days ago, and now I play the game and I can get this this score is so much better now. Like I'm able to play this map so much easier or
Right,
so
right.
much better than what I did like a couple of days ago. I think seeing that kind of improvement was really rewarding and kind of what's the word?
Like
I
self-motivating
don't know.
in a sense.
Yeah, motivating, encouraging to
Uh,
like constantly keep playing. Um, because there was no like there's no downside to not playing. You own like when you're new and you keep playing, you can only get rewarded.
oh, yeah, yeah.
And I think seeing that was why I was able to play so much. But now, I it sometimes it's a struggle because you play a map and it's like, yeah, I'm able to get this score, but no matter how much I try and play the map, like grind and push skill cap, it's not the same. It's like it takes so much longer to see any sort of improvement, and even still, like, and the amount of improvement that you see is so minimal, um, compared to what I saw when first starting out, I suppose. Which is it sucks, but I mean that's kind of just how it is, I suppose, with anything. Once you first start out at something, you improve really quickly at it, and then you're bound to just slow down after you get a little bit better, I suppose.
Right. Well, what's the strategy, so to speak, for breaking past those walls? Is it just like you're the same principles of just pushing yourself, but it just kind of takes longer? Or how would you describe like
Um,
once you reach that certain level where natural improvement starts to slow down?
to improve now, I have to push myself so much more than what I did before, right? Whereas before I could log on, play like an extra diff, right, instead of an insane, and be like, damn, this is like so hard, this is impossible. And now I log on, I play like some speed map, and it's like, damn, I'm like kind of not doing any better than what I did 2 days ago, or I'm doing so much worse than the other day. Um, and like speed especially, I mean, I feel like I play and then I'm at the point where I have to play stuff that's so hard at like physically straining that I can't last longer for like an hour playing at like my peak, which also kind of doesn't help towards like improving, because before, right, when I'm playing and improving, I'm playing 4 stars and they're not really like that mechanically demanding in the whole
uh,
scheme of things.
yep.
Like I'm able to play for 4 or 5 hours and like not have any major kind of like straining of my arms, my hands. But I don't know, man. It's tough. But I think also improving, you gotta play stuff that pushes yourself, um, but not like you play not to the. You can't be playing stuff that you cannot physically play. Like if I were to be a new player and try and play like 200 BPM streams or something, like it's just not gonna work. There's no point playing that to improve at tapping when I could be playing like 160 BPM bursts or something instead, where I can actually pass a map and not actually like have the potential to also injure myself at the same
Right.
time.
Yeah.
I think a couple of people come into my chat when I stream sometimes and are like, "Oh, how do you get better at stamina? Like, how do you get better at tapping and speed? And it's like, first of all, some of them are like, oh, I can stream 200 BPM or 220 for like X amount of notes. Like, say they play some BPM like stream practice map that has like 2,000 notes, and it's like those aren't really indicative of your skill, I suppose I'd say, or how comfortable you are at playing a BPM, because you're never going to play an actual map other than those benchmark maps. There's no maps in the game that have like 2,000 note streams, and you'll never have to play anything as draining as that ever. So I think it's kind of pointless doing that. And at the same time, if you, what's the word? Like playing streams, like excessively long streams, I don't think is that helpful in improving your stamina, right? You like start to mash after a certain amount of notes, and then it doesn't really work. Yeah, I don't see the appeal of it personally.
Interesting. So then, what are some of the, I guess, more helpful strategies when it comes to pushing stamina? Is it just a matter of like playing actual maps that are constantly challenging your stamina, but like stuff with like constant bursts and higher BPMs than you're comfortable with and things like that?
I think starting out when I started playing speed, because I got to 3-digit and I could not play 180 for like longer than 9 notes. It was terrible. I think playing higher BPMs is helpful to a certain extent, but then if you only play higher BPMs like exclusively, you also lose your ability to control your tapping at like normal BPMs, right? If I only play 260 bursts, I'm not going to be able to. I'm not tapping the same as what I would for a 200 BPM stream, and so when the time comes to play that 200 BPM stream, it's not going to work, because
Right.
I haven't been actively playing at that BPM, or like have the finger control built up to play streams at that BPM. But I think to a certain extent, playing faster stuff does help with stamina. I mean, I could say that playing stuff at 260 for me has helped my stamina at 200, but also playing 200 BPM streams at the same time, because you can't only play one thing, right? You need to play a bit of everything, really. You can't only limit yourself to playing one thing and expect to get better at everything or all aspects of tapping, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of people make that mistake where they focus in on one aspect of tapping or aim or anything in the game, and then they lose kind of their ability to play other aspects of tapping, and that's why they might see a lack of improvement or other, like I can play this 8-star jump pattern, but I actually can't aim this normal 6-star, like small jumps kind of thing.
Right.
You only focusing on one thing is, I think, less kind of detrimental than if you just play a bunch of other things, not pushing yourself as hard kind of thing.
Oh, interesting. So, because I'm curious also, and I think we can start to approach this topic more gradually, but specifically like a tournament skill set, and sort of how you cultivate that. But I think before we get there, I'm curious to hear a little more about how you went from, like, you reached 3-digit and you could barely even do 180 BPM at that, as far as bursting and streaming. And you went from there to, at what point did you start really focusing on speed? And where do tournaments also fall in this timeline?
Uh, well, I think before I was playing tournaments with friends, a couple of friends, team tournaments when I was four digit. Um, I think I started kind of grinding tournaments when I was around rank 2K ish, kind of actively getting more involved and trying a bit harder in those. But I think also playing in tournaments kind of pushed me to push speed as well, because you if you only excel at one skill set in a tournament, it's so hard to win the other like five slots that test the other skill set that
Right.
you're bad at, right? So I think that kind of pushed me to learning speed, and well, not speed, but tapping in general, because I couldn't play streaming no mods or speedy DTs or anything like that. Um, and then kind of just seeing other people pop off and um, like my friends going insane on speed. I think that was a motivator. Uh, but I think actually the main reason why I got into it actually was OWC. I think it was 3 years ago now. Um,
2019?
the, yeah, I think. Oh, no, 2020. I think.
Okay.
Um, it was there was an Australian team that was pretty much 7 players that were set in stone, and the team was only looking for the last player, and they really needed someone who can fill in for speed, as I think the speed roster was kind of lacking, which is kind of crazy to say considering some of the players that we have in our country. But I think I found out about that in May, June, and then by the time OWC came around in October, I had just been playing speed for 3 months, just trying to grind out and get a spot on the team, I suppose. Um, because it meant so much to me to get onto that team, and play in OWC, because that was like my main, like the goal, the number one goal that I had when starting out. Right, is
Oh,
I I start the game, OWC is like a month later, and it's like, damn, wouldn't it be cool to play in OWC one day and like play for your country? That'd be so cool. Um, so I think that was the main motivator to me learning speed.
dang, that's cool actually. So you started playing tournaments even before you reached three digit, and
Mm.
then by the time OWC came around that following year in 2020, so I assume you were already somewhat established as a, like people started recognizing your name around the
Uh,
community, or not really?
yeah, a little bit. I think we have our ANZT tournaments, which are our 1v1 Australian tournaments, that are held twice a year. And I suppose I had been getting kind of known through that in the Australian community, but at the same time, it was only for like hard rock and kind of no mod skill. And at the same time, I wasn't placing super high. It was kind of just um like top 12 and top 16 and stuff. But um as I suppose learning speed really helps me improve in that aspect as well, because I would only lose on speed through those tournaments as well. And being able to, push past the top 12, top 16 barrier, kind of, it motivated me kind of even more to improve speed, because if I if I can win on these skill sets, kind of hard rock and like consistency aim picks in tournaments, and then if I also don't get completely stomped in speed, then I mean, why not just keep grinding speed out, right? And
Oh, I see. Okay, so you started playing speed basically through tournaments, and then once you did you end up getting on the team in 2020 as the eighth player?
Yes.
Ah, okay. So you ended up becoming that fill player for speed.
Mm,
That seems like a
I
pretty
think,
short amount of time.
yeah, it was um it was playing speed like pretty much every single day. Um, I kind of already had my DT reading. It was okay relatively. I could play 10.3 and like 240 BPM maps, like your generic TV size farm jump maps and everything. Um, it was kind of just pushing my my speed to be able to tap like 260 bursts and triples and quints. Really, I mean, in OWC you don't really. I don't think the speed in OWC gets that difficult until maybe semis, where if you're a speed specialist, you don't really get gated until there.
All right.
Um, so I think for the most part of 2020, I think it was relatively okay at being able to keep up with everything, keep up with like the maps in the tournament and put up scores that were relatively okay compared to some of the big speed players such as like Dust Dice or you know like Okinamo. I think those are like the two biggest big players when I think of 2020 because we did lose to Germany
Oh,
that year.
what was like the specific, I guess, strategy that you used to really grind speed through at that time? I know you mentioned that you pretty much played it every single day, and the volume,
Mm,
sheer volume of how much you played is not to be discredited. But I'm curious, what if you had like specific routines or specific maps or like a certain difficulty range or BPM that you always try to be like a little bit above compared to your current level?
yeah.
But how would you describe if you had to like explain to someone else to basically do the same thing? Not really the same thing, but like follow in your footsteps as far as
Mm.
how you grinded speed so quickly during that time.
A couple of my other friends who were playing at the time, one was popping off and doing a bunch of like at the time like insane DT scores on insane diffs and stuff that was like 280 BPM and higher, which like in 2020 there was no Haga, there was nobody really doing stuff like that.
Right.
Um, so that really seeing him being able to do that really pushed me to to kind of emulate that. Um, because I also thought that like, damn, if I could tap 280, like I would be so cool because there's nobody else that can do it, right? Um, but I mean, just to improve its speed, I played Insane Diff DT really. Um, you can search the BPM filters in OC. I think I went, what was it, 250 to 280 BPM Insane Diffs, and you just F2 play every single one that you can find. Because Insane Diffs are at the level where there's no long streams. Everything's kind of undermapped in a sense where it's only limited to triples and quints. So if you don't have the tapping stamina, you can kind of just grind out your raw speed on those. Um, and I mean, they also had no aim either, so you couldn't really get aim gapped either. Um, but the other thing was actually playing multis, speed multis with a couple of friends. I think that really helped improve just general reading of 10.3, and being able to read when triples and like bursts come up in general, because I think that's one of the more difficult parts of insane diff DTs, is actually being able to know when the bursts are happening sometimes, because especially in older uh, insanes, some of the bursts don't really make sense with the music, but
Oh, that's true.
um, it was alright. I mean, I think also limiting yourself and retry spamming one map is not helpful to learning a skill set. I think if you only play one map and you're like, wow, I can read this map, I can read all 10.3. Um, it doesn't really work that way. You need to play a range of stuff with a range of patterns and um, like bursts and everything to really get comfortable at said BPM or skill set, really.
Right, that makes a lot of sense actually, and especially the whole like only like limiting yourself as far as like the amount of maps that you, or the variety of maps that you play, and
Mm.
feeling like, oh, if I just memorize this map and it's 10.3, then like now I can play 10.3.
No, it's yeah. I see a lot of people saying that, and like in Twitch chats or anything, and it's like, can you really read 10.3 though? I seriously doubt it. I think being if you people don't do that, and I think it's kind of silly. I think it's self-explanatory where if you just play a range of different things, you're bound to get better at reading that AR or set like patterns. I'm not sure. I always found that to be common sense, but
Right.
um yeah, I don't know.
So you started out early on, as you mentioned, you were mostly playing Nomad and some Hard Rock on longer maps, and then
Mm,
from there you started playing tournaments, and a little while later started really pushing your speed, and then that sort of
mm.
became your prominent skill set. So throughout your time playing tournaments, were there any other skill sets that you really started to work on and try to improve in order to become more well-rounded overall, or was it mostly just going from like no more hard rock consistency to just sort of switching straight to speed?
Um I suppose just like consistency in general, like consistency aim slots, your nomad ones, your hidden ones, harder ones, all of that stuff. I think there was a period of time where I really tried to push 6.5 as well. But I mean, just being able to play aim consistency, I think really helps with a bunch of other slots, like your tech maps, your alt slots, where all of these slots have some sort of aim control, um, and tapping to an extent, but I think the tapping in those slots is so much easier than like your hidden ones sometimes, your hard rock ones, um, especially nowadays, hard rock ones. Oh my god, they are like stream maps only. Um, but really, just playing tournament pools helps me improve. I think in general, at everything except air raid. Air raid is still impossible, and anyone who can play air raid hidden is like cheating. I swear to God, it is the hardest skill set in the game. Impossible.
That's funny. So you okay, so in your current position as someone who's specialized mostly in speed, do you feel like starting out with Nomad and Hard Rock like consistency stuff was actually an advantage, or do you wish if you could go back that you would have just focused on speed from the get-go?
Um, no, I think it definitely helped. I think being able to play longer maps helps with like basic nerve control as well as just being able to hold combos for a period, like an extended period of time. Um, and it also really helps build like your basis of being able to play lower BPMs that don't get covered in DT, like say from your 170 to 200. Um, so I think if you only play speed and play speed from the get-go, you don't become comfortable in those BPMs or the ability to play um, no mod or hard rock or anything like that nearly as well as if you actually just play the skill set and play those maps. And I think it also helped with basic aim control and stuff like that, which also helped build some sort of basis to play DT.
So then, at what point would you recommend someone if, let's say, I'm a brand new player and I want to eventually be one of the, like among the best speed players in the game? What would you recommend I start focusing on from the very beginning?
Oh God, there's so much. I'd say just build first of all, like building your ability to read and like comprehend patterns, like understand that this jump is this far and this burst has this many notes. And then once you have that, I mean, you can move up to higher ARs and play higher BPMs. But I think it's super important to not exclusively play those. I think it's fine to play like speed for 3 hours a day or whatever, but you should have like half an hour at least where you play no mod or some sort of lower BPM to not like alienate yourself from like a normal BPM or a normal style of map. But I mean, once you have the basics down pat and you can start reading and tapping quicker, I think Insane Diff DT is super, super helpful in learning kind of the building blocks of speed. And it really helps you, I think, to build on, say, like if you can play 260 on an Insane Diff and you can play triples and quints on an Insane Diff, then you can build on that and play the same BPM on a higher diff that has more triples and more quints and drains your stamina even more. And then, I mean, DT. I mean, once you get to those higher diffs, anyways, and you master your tapping to a certain extent, you can really start to push aim as well. And I think aim in the harder speed maps is what makes the speed maps not really a speed map. They're all aim maps, every single one of them. But because I've certainly gotten to the point where I get gapped on aim on like 90% of the maps that I play, and to be honest, I don't know. I play aim, and sure, it like some days it feels better than others, but it's so hard to push both at the same time. I think the people who can do that are like, your top players like Ryuke, Utami, like all these guys who can push both of these skill sets at the same time and become both like insane at both of them. It's such a hard thing to do, and I have so much respect for those guys. They're insane at the game.
So going back to the whole like newer players sort of like gradually building up and sort of like you need to have some basis of fundamental, so to speak.
Yeah.
How would you be able to tell if you've sort of reached that point where you can start adding DT to things?
I think when you get to the point where you can play relatively hard no mod and like some easier DT, say like around 6 to 6.5 stars, I'd say for both. And you're able to play it like pretty well. I think that's when you could be able to move on to DT. At least that's when I started getting into DT, is around that, being able to play that sort of difficulty of maps.
Okay. So because I know insane diffs, which are basically like 4 to maybe 4.8 ish, those types of maps, when you add DT, they become somewhere around 6 stars. So that
Yeah.
does definitely make sense. That you sort of like you want to at least build up to that level from a more fundamental nomad standpoint and really get yourself
Mm,
grounded and all the star ratings under that as well.
yeah.
So you've played a mix of both 1v1 and team tournaments. What would you say is the difference between the two, and what would you say are the important things to keep in mind? Like what makes someone a good 1v1 player, and then what makes someone a good player in a team tournament?
I think your all-round ability in the 1v1 is so much more rewarding than it is in a team tournament, because you can have 5 people who can play the same map in a team tournament, but if you're the specialist in that team, then you're the one that's going to be like bound to be playing that map and perform better than others when the maps get harder, right? Because if I'm an all-rounder and I can only play speed to say a quarterfinals level, and I have this speed player on my team who can play it up to finals, that's so much more like highly regarded in a team tournament. Whereas, and if you only, it works in the same way. If you're only a specialist in one skill set and you play a 1v1 tournament, you're going to get destroyed in all of the other skill sets. If you don't have some sort of basis, or you can't play that skill to an except like a certain level. I don't know. I think talking from like our like OWC roster this year, we have a three all rounders kind of, and then we have 3 4 specialists for hard rock, and then another 2 for hidden, and then so on. Just because being able to be an all rounder doesn't mean that you'll necessarily do extremely well in a team tournament setting. Because I think also some maps in team tournaments or some map pools kind of specialize their slots a little bit more than what they do in solo tournaments. Where if you play a speed map in like some solo tournaments, and you play some speed DT map, it might not be as difficult as a speed DT map in a team tournament, because you also have poolers who pool for the specialized DT players in a team tournament, rather than like having to adjust and pull for solo players who most of the time they're not going to be as specialized in one skill set.
That's actually true. I never considered it quite like that, but when map pooling for 1v1s, you have to consider that everyone's going to have to at least be able to play each map in the pool, aside from the ones that they ban. Like you can't sit out in 1v1s. So
No.
And in that sense, what you were mentioning earlier is that like there's value for the different types of players. Both like very well-rounded players will dominate more in 1v1s, where they can take advantage of all their opponent's weaknesses. And then specialists with a higher skill cap, but less well-roundedness overall, are still going to have super high value in team tournaments, where they can just go in for those couple maps that they just beast on everyone, and they will just have that much more value than a well-rounded player that can hold their own decently, but are going to get skill capped by the time the matches start to get really hard.
Yeah. Unless you're like Emmerich or Utami, then right. I mean, you're a specialist and everything at that point. But it really, apart from those two, there's only like 2 other people really that are really like specialists in absolutely everything and just dominate on everything. And I think that just shows how hard it is to maintain your skill level on a range of different skill sets, rather than just focusing on the one. And why they are the best players in the world, really.
True.
Because they can do that.
So speaking of map pooling, I want to touch on your experience working either with map pools or with map poolers. I think you've made a couple maps for tournaments. Can you talk a
Uh,
bit about that experience?
um, well, there, there's always slots have sort of these predetermined um kind of maps that you're testing, right? Say no mod one, you have speed. No mod two, you have streams. No mod three, alts, tech, etc., etc. Um, but also map pools have to consider when there's this amount of flow aim in a tech map or an alt map, and then you can't have, say, your no mod two or your some other maps in your pool be as flow heavy, and you have to adjust for that. Otherwise, your pool becomes super biased in one sort of skill set. Um, I mean, that's also when customs really help, because you can tailor make like a map to suit what the tournament needs and what the pool lacks, to a certain extent. But I mean, a lot of the complaints about tournament pools lately is that they've become too streamlined, I think, in kind of the slots that they're testing and some of the skill sets, especially stuff like, your no mod twos that are all just circular flow streams, and
Right.
then your no mod threes, like your alt. I think there was like a lot of discussion before on alt being like just a second no mod two, right, with just a bunch of flow aim at like 150 BPM or whatever. Um,
Oh, interesting.
so
I don't think I ever heard
I
that.
think. Oh really? I think it was Bubble Man for quite a while was like very against having the alt maps test flow. And I think a lot of people sort of jumped on that bandwagon that if you have your alt map test flow when you also have your stream map test flow, it kind of isn't a good experience to play. They kind of overlap, and I think that's sort of why number threes have shifted towards these sort of lower BPM snap aims maps, that you now see in OWC, you see in Corsace and all these big tournaments. I think that's where custom mapping really helps fill a slot when you don't have ranked maps or even graveyarded maps that can fill those slots or fill what a pool is lacking to a certain extent.
Someone asked an interesting question. They said, "Do you think it's cooler to have no custom maps in tournaments?"
I personally do not mind if the map is a custom map or not. I think so long as the map feels like it tests the skill set correctly and the pool isn't biased to a certain skill set, then even if it's not a custom or it's a custom, it doesn't matter. Then just so long as it tests the slot correctly and in a semi-fun way, then um, that's all that matters to me as a player. But I think also, in OWC and stuff like that, you don't really get to see some of the iconic maps anymore, which is a little bit sad watching it. And I think it removes kind of relatability for players. It's like I've played this map and now I'm seeing the best players in the world play the same map, in a tournament setting. But I think, um, custom maps have their upsides and downsides, but I think as a whole, they're pretty good.
What got you first started? I guess we can start with just what got you first started in mapping, and then how did that transition to mapping for tournaments?
What? How did I get started in mapping? Actually, I haven't thought about that in a long time.
It looks like your first submitted map was in April 2020. Were there any maps that you made before that time?
Yes,
Okay.
There were a couple, but I deleted them later on because they were not all that good. But I think I mean, getting into mapping, I suppose, just wanting to map the songs that I like or would like to see in Osu. Although a couple of the stuff that I've mapped, there's stuff already in Osu, but also I don't know. Sometimes I play a map and it's like not how I would expect it, or I feel disappointed in the map. So I've kind of tried to map a couple of them. I think that's kind of how I got into it initially, is playing stuff, trying to map stuff that I would enjoy playing. Um, but I think looking back on it now, if I look at some of the, like most of my maps, I think I dislike the majority of them, just because I'm not sure why. I can't explain it. Mm. And then getting into tournament mapping, I think some slots really lack good maps that for a tournament setting.
Right.
Like your No Mod 2s, there's for a certain difficulty range, there's maybe like at least a year or two ago, there were like 2 maps that you could put in for said No Mod 2 at this difficulty range. And that's also part of the appeal of custom maps, is you get to see something new that's not quite as overused, and you don't play in every single tournament. And just having new content and new maps to play, I think that's pretty cool. Personally, getting into custom mapping for me, I think it was just a couple of friends hosting tournaments, and then they were like, "Hey, do you wanna try out mapping this for my tournament?" And it's like, you know what, why not? I think that's, how many times have I made custom maps? Like three,
Okay, so
three
not
times, four
that
times.
many.
No, but I mean, it's just because No Mod 2 mapping is like, mapping streams the most boring thing ever. But I think now there's not as much pressure to have custom maps in tournaments. There is so much, like there've been that many customs now that you can choose from, like a huge range of tournament maps, and they will fit in relatively well in your pool,
Right.
regardless.
That's true. Yeah, I think there's a solid like backlog of custom maps that can be used now. But
Mm,
yeah, I especially agree with like stream maps were just so not like so many of them were just not viable. Either like
no,
it was mostly streamy, but there's just random jumps, or it's like they're all
yeah,
5 minutes long, like metal songs are even
yeah.
longer, and it's just so
Or it was like the BPM was too high, or it was too low, or
yeah,
what was another thing that was about?
like the spacing I think also is a huge thing.
Oh, yeah, but I think also the shift between maps having like only testing, people wanting maps to only test one skill before, and now how that's shifted to like people being bored of that. I think that's also kind of interesting.
Oh yeah, and like the
Um,
current meta.
yeah, and everyone's sick of like maps testing one skill set and want more skill sets to be involved in a specific slot, and I think that's, I'm not sure on that. I think sure you get sick of playing maps that only test one skill set, but at the same time, if you try to like integrate multiple skill sets and have like aim and a bunch of other stuff in your stream map, I think that's also, again, not what a slot should be testing. But at the same time, I think what I think on tournament pools and slots differs to like a lot of other people and other players, especially with OWC. Actually, now there was actually quite a bit of um, conversation in the feedback channel over this week's pool that
Oh yeah.
um, the free mod speed map has too much aim, which I think is interesting because I think on one hand I kind of relate to it, and I think there is probably a bit too much aim, but at the same time, what the poolers are saying that they they want no mod 5s and speed maps in the early stages to have some sort of added difficulty because early stage speed in like big tournaments like OWC and Corsair, you you usually get 8-way FCs in
Right.
these tournaments where everyone can play speed at an easier difficulty. And so I can agree with both sides. I think they both raise valid reasons for the pool and the maps. Um, but I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see how pools shift and after this OWC especially, and how people approach pooling next year and the years following, of course.
Yeah, I think it's one of those interesting things that like the meta is always evolving.
Mm.
So through your experience mapping, do you feel like that has had any effect on your gameplay? Like, does it help you like get a better feel for the like reading patterns or like processing things?
Yeah, kind of. I think like getting more involved with mapping, you can kind of see, like you become more observant of patterns. I think, and what mappers do, and listening to the music. I think that's helped me kind of to expect that this section is ending and then this sound is going to play in this section, which means this pattern's going to play, or it's going to have this amount of notes or whatever. So I think that's kind of helps a little bit, but I don't know, apart from just seeing, like, observing some patterns in maps and listening to the music a little bit more, I don't know if it actually has done a ton. I've never actually thought about this though. That's interesting.
That's actually a good point that you brought up, that like as you get more familiar with like how maps are typically structured, and especially like how it relates to the music itself, you can like start picking up on cues in the music that sort of tell you when a certain section is ending, and like if a certain section is repeating, then you might expect that same pattern that showed up earlier to show up again.
Yeah. I don't know, but it's also like mapping has also made it so like I play a map that has a bad pattern and it's like I now hate this map because this pattern makes no sense at all. Like what goes through your head to put that pattern there? And I think that's kind of a downside to it. I think that happens quite a bit now with me with playing some maps. It's like this pattern is so bad, like, and I'll just delete the map. I just do not want anything to do with the map. But I think otherwise it's kind of helped with kind of pattern identification, just a little bit. Not, I wouldn't say it's been that impactful that it's made me like a god at reading patterns now or something. I think it's just something else that's had it up on top of everything else.
I'm curious how you go about finding maps, especially since it seems like your standards are relatively high. Are there any specific ways that you find new maps?
I think first, I always look for songs that I'm interested in, first of all, and then it turns out a lot of the maps for those songs just aren't great. Then I give up on that, and then I start moving on to mappers that I like, and then just playing a bunch of stuff from them, and then songs that they've mapped, and then trying maps from the same artists, and I suppose that helps find more mappers. and there's also like mapping groups, I suppose. Like how they have the stereotype of like Chinese mappers being like insane, and then you go through and you play a bunch of Chinese mappers maps, and then that leads you to play someone else's map, or you find a map with some storyboard, or you find a song that you like that artist, and then you try all of the same maps from that artist.
Right.
I think that's been mainly the way that I find maps.
Yeah, I think all of those strategies combined is sort of like the ultimate package. Like you can never really, like you'll never run out of maps.
No, there's literally an endless supply of maps, and there's something for everyone, and there's tens of millions of mapping styles and ways people map things and rhythms and everything. So but I think also just playing a bunch of different stuff also helps with your general improvement and ability to read sort of patterns. I think that's also pretty important, to play a range of different things rather than just playing this specific skill set that you like on this specific map. I think it's good to try out different things and kind of look through maps.
All right, but yeah, definitely going to people's beat map sections on their profile, so valuable.
People that favorite tens of millions of map though, I don't know, man. There's too many maps to go through there.
Wait a minute.
Looking at you, Hypno.
Wait.
How many maps do you have favorited?
More is merrier. What are you talking about?
562. There is no shot I'm looking through 562. I'm sorry.
Look through the first few. It's like, okay, I got.
True. I will look at like the first maybe 50. Maybe.
The reason why I started adding so many maps to favorites is because I used it to download maps in OC Laser.
Oh, okay, fair enough then.
Yeah, because it was like inconvenient to switch things over. So
yeah,
at a certain phase, I started like favoriting maps that I wanted to transfer over to Laser, or like keep in mind in case my song list got reset. I was like, okay, I can come back to this, like this list. So. Yeah,
that's fair enough then. That's. I was about to say.
Oh no. Okay.
Some people do it for the sake of it. I was like, oh, how do you expect me to look through your 700 favorite beat maps? Like, there's no way.
All right. I was actually thinking about that looking at your profile, because it seems like only recently have you added some of these favorited maps on your profile. Do you clear it out often or what?
I mean, I've had like the same 3 or 4 maps in there for a while, I think. And then just adding a couple of maps and removing a couple that I like over the times that I play. Like, there's a couple of Halia maps that I've been enjoying more recently. But there's like a Calibe map that I've always liked, and a Mocho map that I've liked for a while now. So I suppose I remove things and change it up whenever I get sick of maps, or I find something that's new or better. Trying to keep it kind of exclusive,
like up to date,
to a couple of maps that I am currently enjoying.
Interesting. That does make sense. That makes sense. I've heard many different philosophies when it comes to favorited maps, so it's always interesting to hear people's perspectives. So I wanted to touch on high AR a little bit, sort of the other aspect, so to speak, of speed. Are there any specific strategies you would recommend people for pushing their higher AR?
Well, to be honest, I'm pretty bad at anything above 10.5, and I can't really sight read above 10.5, so I kind of memorize the maps, don't tell anybody. But I think high ARs, it's so hard that I think sometimes it's okay to memorize a map to an extent, but not like forcing yourself to like complete memory. I can't form words to completely memorize it, but like associate different parts of the song to like different sections, different rhythms, different bursts. I think that's what I mainly do when the AR becomes that high. I play map a couple of times and then kind of just learning to associate different sections of the song to different rhythms. Not so much aim patterns. I think reading aim is relatively easy in compared to reading stuff that's like stacked or like triples that are stacked or like triples under sliders or notes under slider ends. I think you can memorize for that to a certain extent, but if you memorizing to learn like patterns that are spaced out, I think that's kind of detrimental. I think if you're having to do that, then you're at a spot where you probably shouldn't be playing that AR because you're not comfortable enough in general to be playing it.
So
at least that's my take.
Okay, so basically, like, if you're not comfortable enough to like read, or like,
if you can't read like individual space notes, say like jumps or like not even jumps, but like full beat spacing notes where there's like a little bit of break, like a break between them.
No, like one rhythm, kind of like slower than single taps.
Yeah, if you can't read stuff like that or like sliders, I suppose, then you should probably not worry about playing the map unless you're like really dedicated to getting a score on it, or other than reading, like it's not mechanically difficult. But once you get to like higher ARs, like the mechanics that you need to play those types of maps are generally like that much harder than something that's not AR like 10.7 or something like that, because you don't usually see, say like extra diffs have a base AR of 9.5. Normally the playable maps with DT are those that aren't like 8 stars, 8.5 stars, because those are the maps where you have a base map, like the map has a base SR of like star rating of say like 6.3 or something with an AR of 9.5.
Oh my god.
And you slap DT on that, and then that becomes like 9 stars. That, apart from like reading the map, is just probably too difficult in general to be playing for you.
That's true.
Unless, I mean, you're a god and you have the mechanics but not the reading, then I mean that's a different story. But I think reading comes along with playing mechanically difficult maps, and especially DT.
So what about sort of like mid-range, like kind of breaking into high BPM, like AR10 with Hard Rock, or even just 10.3? How would you recommend like starting to break into like AR10 and beyond?
I think playing AR10 on Hard Rock and AR10 on DT are two different things, because you also have to adjust for like BPM differences and everything as well, right?
Right.
I think that's where if you're trying to break into AR10, and I think playing Hard Rock first is a pretty good basis of like learning to read on like a normal BPM kind of thing, a lower BPM. And then if you struggle to like, if you play DT 10 AR10 and you struggle with the BPM, I think that's when like map edits and stuff like Osu Trainer can help, where you can speed up the map to not quite a DT BPM but a little bit lower, and also adjust the AR to still be at a similar level. I think that helps pretty well.
Okay, so sort of tinkering with the map stats a little bit so that it's just a slightly more comfortable or not as overwhelming for you to break into.
I think Osu Trainer is such an underrated tool that a lot of people don't know about, and it's such a shame because it it can help you in so many different ways. You can adjust any map stat pretty easily, like CS or AR, and you can change BPMs as well, so you don't have to play quite DT BPM, but it can help you get used to playing at X BPM, say 200 BPM. Um, I think that's also it's pretty good for speed, I'd say, when you can like edit a BPM on, say, like a DNB map that has a ton of triples and quints and stuff, and you struggle at tapping. Playing stuff like that really helps you with your stamina, I think,
Right.
rather than playing maps that have like 50 note streams, because if you die, like say 20 notes into the stream, you just stop tapping, you're not gonna necessarily be improving. But actively playing triples and quints helps train, I think, your stamina and your ability to tap at a certain BPM and become better at bursting, but then ultimately leading into streaming that BPM.
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask about that last point. Like, do you feel like pushing your speed cap will indirectly improve your lower BPM stamina as well?
Yes and no. I think if you push your speed cap, you're only going to be limited to playing like triples at the most part. Oh, sorry. And you become too tired to play anything longer than that. So I think, but you also become better at tapping at the same time in general. I mean, you can tap faster. You can get stamina from it, but I think playing lower BPMs on burst heavy maps is such a better way at improving your stamina rather than pushing your raw speed and hoping that does something, because you also get better at playing lower BPM streams and building more finger control in general, I think.
So, touching back on higher AR for a little bit, or really just reading in general, but when you are playing, or I guess when you're reading in general, where exactly are you looking on the screen? Like, where is your attention focused? And is that something that changes depending on the AR?
I think so. I think lower ARs, I think I generally look at each individual note, and especially jumps. But I think as the AR increases, I think it becomes too fast to look at individually. So I look in the general vicinity of where a jump may be, or in the middle of two jumps, because I get a headache if I have to look at 10.5 jumps individually for 3 minutes straight. I think that is probably too much for anybody, and I think I'm sure that most people would read like that. At least I'm assuming so, because it's so difficult not to. I mean, if you look at each individual note at AR11 or as like an extreme, that is like ridiculously hard.
Right.
Compared to just looking at like the general, like in the general area of it, and then using like your muscle memory instead, to aim and hit patterns, rather than having to read each and every note to comprehend where a note is.
So what about on lower ARs like AR9, 9.3, stuff that's like relatively comfortable for most players? And like if you feel like you have the amount of time to still look at each individual note, do you still feel like it's disadvantageous in any way? Like is it only because it's really hard on higher ARs, or is it just kind of sort of less efficient than kind of looking in like general like sort of grouping
Uh,
patterns?
I don't think it's disad like there's no disadvantage to looking at each note individually. I think if you can look in the general area of like and identify patterns as groups and not have to look at them individually, then that's great. That works for you. I mean, whatever works for each player is obviously the better thing, right? Um, but I mean, I don't see that there being any disadvantage to looking at each note until you get into like the extremely high AR kind of AR 10.5 and above.
Okay,
Um,
I see.
Doing whatever works for you is better. I mean, if you can play looking in the general area of notes, that's great. If you have to look at each note, that's also completely fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with either of those.
On a similar topic where you mentioned sort of comfort in general, is I want to ask a bit about actual tapping technique. So we talked a bit about sort of ways to push your speed and sort of like really being in that general range that's
Yeah.
challenging you, and like especially maps that feature like speed without too much other stuff will let you really focus on it, like insane diff with insane diff
Mm.
DTs. But as far as the actual like tactical, I guess, way to move your hand, are there any sort of principles of tapping that you feel like are more advantageous than others, or like specific ways of tapping that just don't serve people very well? And what are your
Um,
general recommendations when it comes to tapping technique?
I think some people as either people tend to jackhammer their keys and raise their finger up a ton to tap, or they don't tap. They tap too lightly, and then they can't tap accurately or have a hard time telling when like their keys actually register. I know some people that play like that, and they get 90% on every single map. Um, but I think the best or the most beneficial thing that I learned when playing speed was to keep my tapping finger on the key, not raising it off it. I think you by raising your finger off the key, you lose a lot of it's wasted space really. Um, and I single tap as well, so I mean that doing that really helps me with not losing any speed and maintaining stamina. Um, I think also lifting your hand up to have your wrist not touch your desk is also pretty good. And not finger locking and helping maintain stamina on streams. Um, but other than that, I think the main thing is just keeping your fingers close to your keys and not actually moving them a significant amount above the key to reset your tapping or to move on to the next note. I think a ton of people do that, and it wastes stamina, it wastes speed. It's just not a very efficient way of tapping, I don't think.
Yeah, I've sort of had that same belief for a long time, where it's like in the amount of time that you spent lifting the finger that like all the way up there, you could have pressed the key down again, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the one major thing that people tend to not think about, and they just tend to subconsciously lift their key, their finger, like way too high up. And I mean, it probably doesn't help with like injury either. Like you're probably more likely to injure your finger if you lift it and move it more than just keeping on the key, right?
All right, right, that makes
I
sense.
mean, at least that's how I would think of it. Just lifting your wrist as well. I think those are the main two things that help the most. The rest is actually finding your keybinds, correct keybinds on your keyboard is also pretty helpful, and finding something that's comfortable for you. I think that's pretty important. Um, because if you're tapping on a on two keys that you don't find comfortable, I mean, that's bound to not have anything positive for you. So um, it's just experimenting with different key combos and everything on your keyboard. I think that's also a pretty good idea.
I think the last variable here is probably keyboard switches. Is that something you have any comment on?
Not really. I've played with two keyboards in the entirety of the time that I've played Osu, and I think just so long as I mean, raw tapping speed and stamina will carry you more than any keyboard ever will. So I don't think switches are that important in the whole scheme of things.
That is wise. I think that's probably the best answer you could have given for that.
Mm,
Because yeah, I feel like a lot of people get so caught up in their peripherals and their setup and their monitor refresh
yeah,
rate and how trying to optimize their setup instead of just optimizing their own skill level.
no, and especially all this stuff with this Wooting keyboard lately, where it's like, oh, this guy like uses this new keyboard and he can stream 280 with it, or like all this other stuff, and it's like, yeah, but at the same time, he also has like the raw speed in his tapping to be able to tap 280 in the first place.
Right.
Like all this controversy over it, I think is a little bit silly. But I mean, I think some people will do anything to improve, even if that means spending however much on a keyboard, which is
Right.
it's fair. But I mean, some people may not know any better, but I just don't think it's all that necessary.
So I think the other sort of variable in this whole equation is probably your aiming style, especially
Yeah.
between mouse and tablet. So I'm curious your experience with. I assume you're playing with tablet now,
Yes.
but what was your experience with mouse, and at what point did you switch over to tablet?
I played mouse for 4 months. I'm not sure if I'm pretty sure it was 4 months. I think I started in August of 2018, and then I got a tablet for Christmas that year. So I had over the 4 months, I think I got to playing roughly like 5.5 stars maps and being able to play them relatively well for the most part. Again, it's just whatever you find more comfortable and more consistent. But I think you should not think about switching from mouse to tablet before you have some of the other basics down pat, like your reading and your tapping and your general ability to play maps at a certain skill level, because some people may be able to play only say 4 stars no mode, and then they're like, oh, my mouse is gatekeeping me from being able to play harder stuff, when it's in reality it's probably not. Like, maybe sure, your aim isn't fantastic, but I'm sure it's not just your mouse that's causing that. There's got to be like your readings not probably up to par yet. Same with your tapping and your general ability to just play different patterns. I think you should try and play the game and learn the game more before thinking about switching. I think for some people it's something that you don't really need. Mouse is fine. I mean, you have top players that play with mouse. There's really not a big benefit to one over the other. It's just a general comfort thing, I think.
Right. And speaking of setup, I think you mentioned towards the beginning that you started on a laptop. Are you still
Mm.
playing mostly on a laptop, or do you have a PC setup?
I have a PC setup now, but I think what was it that different? I mean, I think playing on anything is fine. I mean, a 144 refresh rate monitor isn't gonna make a big difference when you're just starting to learn out the game and get the whole gist of it. I think so long as you can actually play the game and try different things and play different types of maps, that's more beneficial than playing on a $3,000 setup or something with a mechanical keyboard or a tablet or anything like that.
Right. I think your sort of overall, like, I guess, mindset here that it matters a lot less the peripherals that you're playing with as much as the
Mm,
actual skill level that you develop yourself.
yeah, and yeah, I think it's just the effort that you put into the game will matter so much more than what you play with or what you. It's this game is just a mental game. Honestly, you you think you can do something, you can honestly hit anything. It's That's how nerves work. That's how you read patterns. Really, it's all mental game.
I was actually just about to ask about that, the sort of mindset aspect of the game. Do you have any, or in your mind, what makes a good mindset? What sort of constitutes a good mindset as opposed to a bad one?
Comparing yourself to others is okay, but you need to also know that it's not like the be all and end all. Say that like this person got this score and I can't get it. That means I'm bad. Not really. I mean, you may have other aspects that you excel in that they don't. Um, but I think it's also just instead of comparing yourself to others, for the people that do that, I think it's also a good thing to try and compare yourself to your own scores and see how you improve over time. Because if you're looking at a top 50 leaderboard on a map that you play, I mean, yeah, there's going to be a lot of DT scores or hard rock scores with SSs or 99s or whatever. But if you focus on that and not your own improvement and your local scores, I think that's kind of a detrimental thing, and you can gain so much motivation from comparing yourself to things you did, like last week. Like I can do this now compared to what I did last week instead of I only did this compared to what this guy did, or I'm I'm not as good as this other player. And I think having expectations on what you should be able to play is okay, but at the same time, it's super detrimental. I think because I think now I have a pretty bad mindset where I'm like I should be hitting this pattern, or I should be FCing this map, but I'm not, and that gets me all angry and not angry, but like disappointed and upset that I'm not able to do what I think I can do, which it's fine to have expectations, but you shouldn't completely focus on them and think of something as a negative if you don't hit that expectation.
I appreciate how you put those sorts of like disclaimers, so to speak. But it's like, it's okay, but keep in mind that if you do this,
Yeah,
then things are going to be a lot harder for you.
yeah. I think when I started out, it was so much more helpful to look at my scores and compare to what I did, than rather than comparing to what X player did on this leaderboard. I think it helps so much more in what you struggle with, but also what you excel at and what your good skills are. And I think that's way more important than anything else.
Yeah. And at the same time, the confidence thing that you mentioned earlier, where like so many benefits, I guess, or you just get so much value out of having confidence, so to speak.
Mm. Like I said, it's just a mental game. If you Most of the time, if you think you go into a map and you're like, I can hit this pattern or I will get this score on this map, I think it's so good. It helps you so much. It Having a good mindset in this game is literally everything to improvement.
I want to relate that to tournament play actually just a little bit and the confidence aspect and momentum, so to speak. How important do you think it is
Mm.
to have that sort of momentum going into a match, like picking first and making sure you win your first pick and really starting off on the right foot or that sort of
Um,
thing? Do you feel like that sort of stuff is particularly important?
I've had a ton of tournament matches where I've gone, oh, like I've lost my first two picks and then I'm down 4-1 in a best of 11. And I think momentum it does play a part to a certain extent, but at the same time, the match isn't over until it's over, right? You can always pull it back. I think having that in the back of my mind helps a lot more than focusing on the momentum of a match. It also happened to us in OWC last year where we were 5-2 up over the UK and
Oh no.
we lost 5-6.
No.
It was like momentum is great and all, but I think momentum can lead to being complacent, and that's also not a good thing in a tournament setting.
Yeah, that sounds scary for sure. But yeah, I think your point about how like it's a lot less about the momentum per se, as opposed to just always remembering that it's always winnable as long as you're still in that
Mm,
lobby.
yeah, exactly. I think I've had countless times where I've been down match point and somehow miraculously just brought it back because I wouldn't even say it's me playing well. I think it's more just the my opponents becoming complacent and not focusing as much. I think that's it.
I see. Yes, very well said. There's a couple miscellaneous questions that I'll sort of throw out there for you as we wrap up. One
Hmm.
is, do you play Minecraft PvP?
I do not. I'm so sorry.
Oh no. Any other games that
Mm.
you have been focused on these days or that you played actively in the past?
For a while, it was League of Legends, but now Overwatch 2's come out. I'm back on the Overwatch grind.
Let's go.
Um, I used to play it pretty actively when it was out 4 years ago, so it's nice to be able to play it again. Although I'm becoming a bit too distracting, and I'm not practicing for OWC when I really should be.
Oh
But
no.
it's fine. It's fine.
Someone asked, how does listening to twice on an hourly basis improve your aim? In parentheses, they said it does.
It definitely does not, but I think playing songs that you like is also part of the game, and you shouldn't force yourself to play stuff that you wouldn't listen to. I think that's also very important, is to play stuff that you enjoy and just to have fun playing the game because it is a game after all.
All right, I think the last question is one that says, can anybody achieve the skill of a top player?
Yes, yes. I also thought the same thing when I started out, but the amount of effort you put into the game, you will get rewarded with. So you can put a little bit of effort into improving this skill set and not improve that much. But I mean, when I grinded speed for however long, 3 months, 6 months, and then got to have the chance to play on OWC Force to play speed maps. So I think that's more important than anything else.
Yeah, and I mean, even so, like from that point, you push yourself a lot further than when you where you were at that time.
Yeah, I think also having the mindset of like self improvement during the time when you play to improve is also really important rather than being like, I why can I only get this score on this map, right? And getting upset over that rather than focusing on the positives and focusing on your improvement from say the last session or your session that you had last week. I think that's actually that is the most important thing, I think.
Can you elaborate what you mean by the mindset of self improvement?
Not playing a map to say get an FC or something, but focusing to push yourself and improve on what you did in the past. Say if I set a score on this map and get a B rank, then playing the map, say in 2 days' time, to play for an A rank or to get X amount of accuracy higher than what I did last time. I think playing to playing for yourself and playing to look for the positives rather than focusing on, oh, but I only did this, or why can't I do this? It's so much better than focusing on those negatives.
All right. Well said. I think that seems like a good spot to wrap up. Do you have any final words of wisdom or other bits of advice that you want to share with the world?
Not really. I mean, play the game to have fun and don't get too caught up over it. It is just a game after all. Play to have fun. Enjoy it. That's the main thing.
All right. Well said. Thanks again, Jordan, for taking the time to join us and also everyone else for listening. Do you have any places where people can find you other than your OC profile?
I sometimes stream on Twitch, the same name, Jordan LR7 on Twitch. Other than that, that's really it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks again for joining and everyone for listening. We will see you all next time.